Daniel's final confession. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then your mother has finally told you who I really am. Not just your uncle, but the man who loved your grandmother before you were born, the man whose existence was a secret that shaped your entire family's history. But there's more to the story, things your mother doesn't even know. Things I discovered in the last years of my life when I hired private investigators to find out the truth about my adoption and why Catherine Thornton was so desperate to keep Eleanor and me apart. The official story, the one your grandmother told on her deathbed, is that she gave me up because she was 17 and unwed. That she recognized me when I returned and tried to separate us because we were half-siblings. That story is true, but it's not the whole truth. Rebecca, your grandmother didn't just give me up because of shame. She gave me up because I was evidence of a crime. The dark secret. Rebecca's hands trembled so badly I had to steady the pages for her. She continued reading. In 1958, Catherine Thornton was not a willing participant in my conception. The traveling musician she supposedly fell in love with was actually a man named James Crawford, the son of the wealthiest family in 3 counties. He was engaged to someone else, and Catherine was the help, a girl from town who cleaned his family's summer estate. James Crawford raped her. When she told her parents, they didn't believe her. The Crawfords were too powerful, too connected. Instead, Catherine's family made a deal with the Crawfords. In exchange for silence, they would receive a substantial sum of money, enough to elevate their social status and erase their poverty. Catherine was sent away, forced to carry her rapist's child, and then forced to give that child away. The money her family received became the foundation of the Thornton fortune, the wealth that you, Rebecca, grew up with. Rebecca looked up at me, her face white. Is this true? Shocking resolution that brings both justice and healing. J. 3 Part 3. The Truth and Revenge. The letter that waited. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my bedroom with Daniel's final letter on my lap, sealed and untouched for 5 years. The envelope was thick, cream-colored paper with my daughter's name written in Daniel's elegant script. For Rebecca, to be opened when she knows the truth. He had given it to me 3 days before he died, his hand shaking from the cancer that was consuming him. Promise me, he had whispered, his voice barely audible. Promise me you'll give this to her when the time is right. She needs to know everything, Eleanor. Especially about Catherine. Catherine, my mother. The woman whose deathbed confession had shattered my world, but whose full story I was only beginning to understand. As dawn broke through my window, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked out to see Rebecca sitting alone in her vehicle, her head resting on the steering wheel. She had come back sooner than I expected. The daughter's return. I met her at the door, and without a word, I handed her Daniel's letter. She stared at it for a long moment before speaking. I couldn't sleep, she said, her voice hoarse. I kept thinking about everything you told me. About Daniel, about Dad, about the baby who died. And I realized there's something you're not telling me. Something about grandmother. I nodded slowly. Read Daniel's letter. He explains it better than I ever could. He spent the last years of his life investigating, uncovering the truth about why Catherine really kept us apart. Rebecca sat on the porch swing where Daniel and I had spent countless evenings talking. I sat beside her as she carefully opened the envelope. Inside were several pages in Daniel's handwriting, along with photocopies of old documents, photographs, and what looked like legal papers. She began to read aloud, her voice shaking. Was it? Rebecca's voice was bitter. Or was I just a convenient excuse for everyone to maintain their lies? The words cut deep, but I couldn't deny there was truth in them. Come back tomorrow, I said quietly. I have more to show you. Daniel's paintings, the letters between him and your father, Thomas's diaries. You deserve to see everything, to understand the full story, and then you can decide if any of us are worthy of your forgiveness. The departure. Rebecca gathered her family and left without another word. Marcus gave me a sympathetic look, but he said nothing. The teenagers seemed stunned, unable to process what they had heard. As I watched them drive away, I felt both relief and terror. The secrets were finally out, but I had no idea if my daughter would ever speak to me again. I climbed back up to the attic and stood before the portrait of Daniel and me by the lake. 2 young people, innocent and full of hope, unaware of the tragedy that awaited them. I told her. I whispered to the painting. I finally told her everything. But even as I said it, I knew there was one more secret left to reveal. One more truth that would either set us free or destroy us completely. And that truth was waiting in Daniel's final letter, the one he had written to Rebecca before he died, the one I had been too afraid to deliver. Tomorrow, I would give it to her. Tomorrow, she would learn the final piece of the puzzle, the one that would explain why Daniel had really come back all those years ago, and what he had discovered about our family that changed everything. The truth about my mother's real reason for keeping us apart was darker than any of us had imagined. And it was time for Rebecca to know it all. The letters from Thomas. The most recent letters you found, the ones from the past 5 years, those are from Thomas. After your father died, he and I became close friends. He wanted to tell you the truth about his relationship with Richard, but I asked him to wait. I wasn't ready to expose everything yet. I handed Rebecca another envelope. This is Thomas's final letter to me. He died last year, and in it, he asked me to tell you everything. He said you deserve to know that your father was a good man who loved you more than anything, even if he couldn't be the conventional father society expected. Rebecca read the letter silently, tears streaming down her face. When she finished, she looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did you let me find out this way? The mother's defense. Because I'm a coward, I admitted. Because every time I tried to imagine this conversation, I saw the love in your eyes turning to disgust. Because I was afraid of losing you, of losing my grandchildren, of being alone with these terrible secrets. But when you found those letters, when you accused me of lying and ruining your life, I realized that silence was its own form of destruction. You deserve the truth, no matter how painful. I took her hands in mine. I'm sorry, Rebecca. I'm sorry for the lies, for the secrets, for the burden you now have to carry. But please understand, everything we did trying to find love and acceptance in a world that wouldn't allow us to be who we really were. The question of forgiveness. Rebecca pulled her hands away, standing up slowly. I need time. I need to process all of this. The man I thought was my father, the uncle I loved, the grandmother I respected, none of them were who I believed they were. They were exactly who you believed them to be, I insisted. They were people who loved you. The circumstances that brought us together were complicated, even tragic, but the love was always real. Once a year, maintaining the fiction of Uncle Daniel. But the light had gone out of his eyes. I looked at Rebecca with all the love and sorrow I had carried for decades. You asked if you're Richard's daughter or Daniel's. The answer is that you are completely, biologically Richard's child. We did the blood test when you were 6 months old, just to be absolutely certain. You have nothing of Daniel in your blood, Rebecca. Nothing except the love he gave you as an uncle. The real father's secret. But there's something else you need to know about your father, something that explains the rest of the letters you found. Rebecca looked exhausted, but she nodded for me to continue. Your father's relationship with Thomas lasted until his death. They were life partners in every way except legally. When your father got sick with cancer 10 years ago, it was Thomas who nursed him, who stayed by his bedside, who held his hand when he died. I was there too, I added. The three of us in that hospital room, finally free to be honest with each other at the very end. Your father's last words were, "Thank you for letting me be myself." He said it to both of us. The inheritance mystery. Marcus spoke for the first time in a long while. The trust fund that paid for Rebecca's education, for our house, it came from Daniel, I confirmed. He left everything to Rebecca in his will. Millions of dollars from his art sales, his investments, everything. He wanted to ensure that the niece he loved would be taken care of, even if he could never claim her as anything more. Rebecca sank to the floor, her back against the old trunk. My whole life has been a lie. No, I said firmly, kneeling beside her. Your whole life has been a complicated truth that we tried to protect you from. Every person in this story loved you. Your father, your Uncle Daniel, Thomas, and me. We all made impossible choices to keep you safe and give you the best life we could. 6 months after Daniel's return, I discovered I was pregnant again. The timing was complicated. Your father and I had been intimate exactly once since your birth, trying to maintain appearances. But Daniel and I had also had a moment of weakness. I could see the horror dawning on Rebecca's face. You slept with him? After you knew he was your brother? We didn't know then, I said desperately. Your grandmother's confession came later. That afternoon when Daniel returned, when emotions were running so high, when we thought we could finally be together, we gave in to years of longing. It was only once, and it was before we knew the truth. "Oh God," Rebecca whispered. "When I realized I might be pregnant with Daniel's child, we were all devastated. Your father insisted on a discreet blood test after the baby was born. The results would tell us whether he or Daniel was the biological father. The results that changed everything." "You were that baby?" Rebecca asked, her face pale. "No," I said quietly. "That baby was your brother. His name was Michael, and he lived for only 3 days. He was born with severe genetic defects, the kind that sometimes occur when close relatives have children together." The room seemed to tilt. Rebecca grabbed the wall for support. "The doctors never knew the real reason for his condition. They called it tragic bad luck. But we knew. We knew that Michael's death was the consequence of our sin, even if it was committed in ignorance." The promise they made. After Michael died, we all made a vow. Daniel would never touch me again. Your father and I would try to make our marriage work for your sake. And we would never speak of this to anyone, ever. The guilt we carried was punishment enough. Daniel left town after the funeral. He moved to California, became even more successful, but he never married, never had other relationships. He visited. "We were surviving," I said firmly. "We were 4 people trapped by society's expectations, trying to find happiness in an impossible situation. Your father loved you deeply, Rebecca. That was never a lie. He was a wonderful father. But did you love him?" Rebecca demanded. "I loved him like a dear friend, like a partner who understood me in ways no one else could. We built a life together based on mutual respect and shared secrets. It wasn't the passionate romance I had with Daniel, but it was real in its own way." The secret meetings. For the next 20 years, Daniel was part of our lives. He came to your birthday parties as Uncle Daniel, the family friend. He taught you to paint when you were little, remember? He was the one who encouraged your love of art. Rebecca's eyes widened. "Uncle Daniel? The man who used to visit every summer? Who brought me art supplies and told me stories about Paris?" "The same. Your father welcomed him into our home because he understood what we all stood to lose if the truth ever came out. And Daniel, he played his role perfectly. He never overstepped, never demanded more than we could give. He loved you like a niece, watched you grow up, and kept our secret. The paintings that held the truth." I walked back to the portrait covered in the corner. But Daniel couldn't stop painting me. Over the years, he created dozens of portraits, each one capturing a different moment, a different memory. He left them to me when he died, with instructions that they should be destroyed or hidden away. I couldn't destroy them. They were all I had left of him, of the love we shared before we knew the truth. So I hid them here in the attic, along with his letters, thinking no one would ever find them. Rebecca's voice was cold now, but I did find them. "And now I need to know, Mother, am I Dad's daughter, or am I Daniel's?" The question hung in the air, the one I had been dreading since this conversation began. The blood test. And I finally told them both about my mother's deathbed confession that I had received just weeks earlier. I looked at Rebecca directly now. "Your grandmother had called me to her bedside when she was dying. She told me everything, about Daniel's birth, about recognizing him when I brought him around, about the terrible choice she made to protect us from committing a sin we didn't even know we were committing. She died begging for forgiveness." Rebecca's voice was barely audible. "So you and Daniel, you were siblings. We never consummated our relationship," I confirmed. "We were innocent, Rebecca. We held hands, we kissed, we made plans, but we never crossed that line. My mother's intervention, as cruel as it was, prevented something that would have haunted us both forever. The plan they made. But here's what you don't know yet, what no one knew until now. That afternoon, sitting in our living room, the 3 of us made a plan. A plan that would give us all a chance at happiness, even if it meant living a lie." Marcus stood up. "What kind of plan?" "Daniel had money now, success, freedom. Your father needed capital for his business and wanted the freedom to be with Thomas without scandal. I wanted to keep my daughter and find some kind of peace." I took a deep breath. "So we made an arrangement. Daniel would invest in your father's business as a silent partner. The profits would be divided 3 ways. Your father and Thomas could be together discreetly while maintaining the appearance of a conventional marriage. And I I could continue to see Daniel as his art instructor without raising suspicion. The web of deception. Rebecca stood up, pacing the small space. You're telling me that my entire childhood was built on this lie? That Dad was gay, that you were in love with your half-brother, that everyone was just pretending. Exhibited in galleries, made a name for himself. He came to take me away, to start the life we had always dreamed of. But you were married with a baby, Rebecca said, her voice hollow. I was trapped in a loveless marriage with a man who was secretly in love with another man, and I had just given birth to a daughter I already loved more than life itself. When Daniel appeared at my door, I thought I was hallucinating. I smiled sadly at the memory. He was standing in the rain, holding a bouquet of wildflowers like the ones he used to pick for me by the lake. He said, I never stopped loving you. I never stopped waiting. Run away with me, Eleanor. We'll take your baby and start over somewhere no one knows us. The confession that changed everything. I wanted to say yes. God help me. I wanted to pack a bag and leave everything behind. But that's when your father came home early. He found Daniel and me standing in the foyer, and I expected him to rage, to throw Daniel out, to end everything right there. Rebecca leaned forward, absorbed despite her shock. What did he do? He invited Daniel in for tea, I said, almost laughing at the memory. Your father, ever the proper gentleman, invited his wife's former lover into our living room and served Earl Grey tea with cucumber sandwiches. That's when the truth came out. Your father recognized Daniel from photographs in old society pages. He had been curious about my past, had investigated, and he knew things even I didn't know. He knew about Daniel's adoption, about my mother's secret, about the men she had hired to drive Daniel away. 3 people, one impossible choice. The 3 of us sat in that living room for hours, sharing our secrets, our pain, our impossible situation. Your father told Daniel about his relationship with Thomas. Daniel told us about the years he had spent trying to forget me, the paintings he had created that were all inspired by our summer together. One night, his face bruised and bloodied. He said men had come to his cottage, destroyed his paintings, and told him if he ever contacted me again, they would kill him. Marcus made a sound of disbelief. Your mother did that. She was protecting a secret that would destroy the family's reputation. In her mind, she was saving both of us from something worse. She told me Daniel had left town, found work in the city, and forgotten about me. She said young love always fades. I believed her because I wanted to trust my mother. I could see tears streaming down Rebecca's face now, and I wanted to hold her, but I knew I had to finish the story first. The marriage of convenience. 2 years later, I married your father, Richard. It was an arrangement that suited both families. Good bloodlines, proper social standing, financial security. On our wedding night, your father made a confession that changed everything. I pulled out another envelope, this one sealed with red wax. This is a letter Richard wrote to me, but never sent. I found it after he died, hidden in his study. In it, he admits the truth about why he agreed to marry me. Rebecca took the letter with trembling fingers and began to read aloud. My dear Eleanor, I married you knowing you loved another man. I married you because I needed your family's money to save my business, and because I could never love any woman. My heart has always belonged to Thomas, my business partner, though society would never accept our truth. I hoped we could give each other cover, a respectable life, perhaps even friendship. I never imagined I would come to care for you as deeply as I have. The return of Daniel. The attic was silent except for the sound of Rebecca's soft crying. I waited, letting the truth settle before continuing. 3 months after you were born, Daniel returned. He had finally saved enough money to come back for me. He had become a successful artist in the city. Was a mixture of love and devastating grief. She kept only this one photograph, hidden in a locked box I found after she died. On the back, she had written his name, Daniel Marcus Thornton. The family who adopted him changed his last name to Bennett, but she never forgot. Rebecca took the photograph with shaking hands. How did she not recognize him when you brought him around? How did neither of you know? She recognized him immediately, I said, my voice breaking. That's why she reacted so violently. That's why she was so desperate to separate us. But Daniel had no idea. He was told his birth mother had died. The family who raised him were kind but poor. They never told him he was adopted. The summer everything changed. I walked to the small window, looking out at the garden below where Daniel and I had once danced in the moonlight. That summer when I was 19, I thought I had found my soulmate. Every moment with Daniel felt perfect, like we had known each other in another lifetime. We would meet at the lake every evening. He would paint, and I would read poetry to him. We talked about running away to Paris, about living in a small apartment, and surviving on love and art. It sounds foolish now, but it felt possible then. Rebecca sat down heavily on the trunk. So grandmother knew the entire time? She watched you fall in love with your own brother and said nothing. She confronted me the night she found his letters. I can still remember her face, white as chalk, her hands shaking as she held the papers. She said, "You don't understand what you're doing. This is forbidden. This is wrong." I thought she meant because of his social class. The violent separation. When I refused to stop seeing him, she did something unforgivable. She hired men to beat him, to run him out of town. Daniel showed up at our meeting place. I met her eyes, knowing that once I spoke the next words, nothing would ever be the same. Because Daniel wasn't just an artist from the countryside, Rebecca. He was your grandmother's son from a relationship before she married your grandfather. Daniel was my half-brother, though neither of us knew it at the time. And when your grandmother discovered our love, she was protecting a secret that would destroy everything. The attic fell completely silent. Rebecca's face showed pure shock, and I knew that the real story was only just beginning to unfold. Would you like me to continue with part 2? The next section will reveal the complete truth about Rebecca's parentage, the revenge plot, and the deeper family secrets that connect everything together. J2 Part 2, The Hidden Romance. The impossible truth. Rebecca stumbled backward, her hand gripping the dusty windowsill for support. The revelation hung in the air like poison, spreading through the cramped attic space and into everyone's lungs. "Half-brother," she whispered. "That's impossible. Grandmother would never." "Your grandmother was 17 when she had Daniel." I continued, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "It was 1958, and she was in love with a traveling musician who passed through town. When her parents discovered she was pregnant, they sent her away to a home for unwed mothers." Marcus had gone pale, his arms still around Rebecca's shoulders. The teenagers sat frozen on an old chest, their eyes wide with disbelief. Daniel was taken from her the moment he was born. She never even got to hold him. The family told everyone she had gone to Europe for finishing school. When she returned 6 months later, she was engaged to your grandfather, a man 20 years older who needed a wife and didn't ask questions. The secret that destroyed lives. I pulled out a faded photograph from the box. It showed a young woman, barely recognizable as my mother, holding a bundle wrapped in blue blankets. Her face. The attic was silent except for quiet crying. My grandchildren had tears in their eyes, and even Marcus looked moved. "So you married Dad without love?" Rebecca asked, her voice small. "I married your father with respect and commitment. I gave him loyalty and partnership. But you're right, Rebecca. I didn't marry him with the kind of love I had for Daniel. And I'm sorry that you somehow paid the price for that." Questions remain. "But the letters you found," Rebecca said, confused. "The ones that made you think I might not be Dad's daughter. What about those?" I took a deep breath. This was the moment I had been dreading. "Those letters are from after your birth, Rebecca. Daniel found me again when you were 3 months old. He had finally learned the truth about my mother's deception. He came to see me one last time." Rebecca's face went pale. Did something happen between you?" "The truth is more complicated than you can imagine," I said. "And before I tell you everything, you need to know that your father, Richard, knew about all of it. We made choices together, choices that affected your entire life." The revelation begins. I walked to the portrait again, touching the painted face of the young woman I used to be. What happened in those few days when Daniel returned changed everything, Rebecca. It exposed secrets that went far beyond just my mother's manipulation. "What secrets?" Rebecca demanded, standing up. "Mother, what are you not telling me?" "Your father wasn't the man you thought he was," I said quietly. "And neither am I. The story of how you came into this world, the truth about our family, it's all connected to Daniel's return. And to understand it, you need to know what really happened that summer, what really drove Daniel away, and why your grandmother was so desperate to keep us apart." "Why?" Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. "These are his letters to me over the next 2 years. Every week, without fail, He wrote to me. He told me about his exhibitions, his growing success as an artist, his dreams of our future together. The deception. And then the letters stopped. I said, my voice breaking. Suddenly, without explanation, Daniel disappeared from my life. I wrote to him, called, even tried to visit, but it was as if he had vanished. Rebecca's face showed confusion now, the anger replaced by something else. My mother told me he had found someone else. She showed me a newspaper clipping of his engagement to another woman. I was devastated, broken. I felt like I had waited for nothing, sacrificed my happiness for a man who had moved on. And that's when you met Dad? Rebecca asked. Yes. Your father, Richard, was kind, stable, from the right family. My mother approved. I was 22 and felt like my life was over anyway. So I married him. The secret revealed. I opened another envelope, my hands shaking. But here's what I discovered years later, Rebecca. Here's the truth I've been carrying for decades. I handed her a letter, dated just 5 years ago. Rebecca's eyes widened as she read. This is from Daniel's sister, she whispered. She says the engagement announcement was fake. That your mother paid a newspaper to print a false story. That Daniel never stopped waiting for you. My mother confessed it to me on her deathbed. I said, tears streaming down my face. She told me what she had done, how she had destroyed the letters he sent after those first 2 years, how she had convinced me he had abandoned me when he never did. The weight of lies. Rebecca sank into an old chair, the letter still in her hands. All these years you knew? I only found out 5 years ago, after your father had already passed away. And by then, Daniel was gone too. He had died 2 years earlier, never married, never stopped loving me according to his sister. Daniel was an artist, a painter who lived in a small cottage by the lake. Everyone in town said he was trouble, too poor, too unconventional, too different. But when I met him, I felt alive for the first time in my life. Forbidden love. We spent that entire summer together. He taught me to paint, to see the world through an artist's eyes. We would talk for hours about philosophy, about dreams, about everything we wanted from life. He painted that portrait by the lake one evening when the sunset turned everything golden. I could see Rebecca's anger beginning to crack, but she remained silent. I fell in love with him completely, totally, in a way I never knew was possible. And he loved me too. We made plans to run away together, to start a new life where no one could tell us we were wrong for each other. So what happened? Rebecca asked quietly. Your grandmother happened, I said, the old bitterness creeping into my voice. My mother discovered our relationship. She was horrified. Daniel was not from our social class. He had no money, no prospects, nothing to offer except love. And to my mother, love was never enough. The threat. Marcus had moved closer to Rebecca, his hand on her shoulder. Even the teenagers were listening intently now. My mother gave me an ultimatum. Leave Daniel and come home, or be cut off from the family completely. No inheritance, no support, no contact with my younger siblings. I was 20 years old and terrified. But you chose to leave him? Rebecca's voice was barely audible. I chose to say goodbye, I corrected her. But Daniel, he was stronger than me. He said he would wait. He said he would work hard, make something of himself, and then come back for me. We promised each other that nothing would keep us apart. I stood up and walked to a small box on the shelf. Inside were more letters, yellowed with age. I found letters. Dozens of them. Love letters from a man who wasn't my father. Letters that proved everything about my life has been a lie. The room spun around me. After all these years, the truth was finally surfacing, but not in the way I had ever imagined. Rebecca, please, let me explain, I whispered. Explain what? That you had an affair? That you lied to Dad? That maybe, just maybe, he wasn't even my real father. Her voice cracked with emotion. The portrait in the attic. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the table. There's something you need to see. Something I should have shown you years ago. Against Marcus's protests, I led everyone upstairs to the attic. The dusty space smelled of old memories and forgotten dreams. I pulled the sheet off an easel in the corner, revealing a portrait I had kept hidden for 40 years. The painting showed a young woman, barely 20, with wild curly hair and eyes full of hope. Next to her stood a man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. They were sitting by a lake, his hand wrapped around hers, both looking at each other as if no one else existed in the world. That's you, Rebecca whispered, stepping closer. But that man, that's not Dad. No, I said softly. That's Daniel. And before you judge me, before you decide who I am based on letters and old paintings, you need to hear the whole story. The beginning of truth. I sat down on an old trunk, suddenly feeling every one of my 65 years. Rebecca remained standing, her arms crossed defensively, but I could see curiosity fighting with anger in her eyes. I was 19 when I met Daniel. I began. It was the summer of 1979. My family had sent me to stay with my aunt in the countryside because, well, let's just say I was too rebellious for their taste. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. She had never heard me talk about my youth before. The dinner that changed everything. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the dining table as I placed the roast chicken at the center. At 65 years old, I still loved hosting Sunday dinners, even though the joy had dimmed over the years. My daughter, Rebecca, arrived late as usual, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor with practiced annoyance. "Mother," she said coldly, barely meeting my eyes. Her husband, Marcus, followed behind, and their 2 teenage children trailed like silent ghosts. Something felt different tonight. The air was thick with unspoken tension. "I'm so glad you could make it, darling," I said, trying to smile. "I made your favorite." Rebecca's laugh was bitter. "My favorite? Mother, you don't even know what my favorite meal is anymore. You never did." The storm begins. I felt my heart sink, but I continued serving the food. 20 years of walking on eggshells around my daughter had taught me patience. But tonight, that patience would be tested beyond measure. "Actually, there's something we need to discuss," Rebecca announced, setting down her wine glass with more force than necessary. "The children won't be visiting you anymore." The room fell silent. Even the grandfather clock seemed to stop ticking. My hands froze over the serving spoon. "What do you mean?" I asked quietly. "I mean exactly what I said. You've poisoned this family long enough with your lies and your secrets. I'm done pretending everything is fine." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The children stared at their plates. I could feel my world beginning to crumble. The accusation. Rebecca stood up, her face flushed with anger that seemed to have been building for years. "Do you want to know what I found last week, Mother? Do you want to know what I discovered while helping you clean out the attic?" My blood ran cold. The attic. I had forgotten about what was hidden there.